I'm going to be experimenting with some insulation, putting more stuffing in the box. Actually, there's nothing in these boxes right now. It's got just a single sheet, something similar to that on the back panel that came from RadioShack like that. I've been doing this build incrementally so that I can see what changes each thing that I do, what effect those changes have. So kind of just looking at it in a micro sense to see what is changing what. Things I know is that with the TS parameters on this Dayton Classic woofer, it really should be in a bigger box. So like the Parts Express website, I think that they use Base Box Pro. It's calling for 2 3/4 cubic foot box, vented. And this is a 2 cubic foot box. It's made out of 1/2 inch thick cheapo MDF. And it's basically just a big empty cavity on the inside. Dimensions, the internal dimensions of it hit in right about 2 cubic foot. So one thing that I always like to do is I like to start tuning, audio tuning with the bass end. I like to get the bass done first. I think that once you lock down the bass, that the rest is just that much easier, rather than trying to focus on a mid-range or a tweeter or a full range sound or whatever it is you're going after. I'd say start with the bass. That's your foundation. That's where a good majority of music is held at, is down in those lower regions, say 1,000 hertz and below. There's a ton of musical content there. So when your speakers can go higher than that and they're full frequency from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, great. But you're only going to be hearing back, what's actually being pumped into them. So there's not a whole lot of musical content out there with stuff up at the 20,000 range or the 20 hertz range. Most of it's going to fall in between, give or take, say 50 hertz to 10,000 hertz, let's say. But it's important to get a nice solid bottom end. That's really what gives a speaker its warmth, its character, its kind of signature. I mean, it's everything, right? Now, I'm not disappointed with these Dayton Classic woofers. They are definitely sounding better than the original RCA woofers that were in. We're going to try to get this bass response a little bit better. To do that, all right, now everybody says, well, you can add volume to a cabinet by putting insulation in, right? Now there's videos out there where guys have done it and they found that stuffing a cabinet, and granted, they're usually working with sealed cabinets, but the end result is usually the same, which is that it does extend the low frequencies. In other words, it's where a speaker might cut off at 40 hertz, let's say, right? A woofer might cut off at 40 hertz pretty sharply. By packing it full of stuffing, you might be able to make that roll off more gradual and make that woofer reach down lower. So, maybe 30 hertz or somewhere along those lines. Depends on the woofer's potential and the box that it's in, obviously. These, right now, when I run frequency sweeps on them, they start to hit my baseline, my kind of reference line, at roughly the 40 hertz range, 40 to 50 hertz range. Theoretically, I think that this box is tuned to about 25 hertz. And that just happens to be the lower range of that woofer. It's not causing a problem per se, but the bass response is a little bit wonky, not quite as full-bodied or punchy as I like it to be. So anyway, I'm gonna look at the easiest changes first. First one being, is it true? If I pack this thing full of insulation, will it behave as if the enclosure is bigger? If we take our kind of the standard rule of thumb is a 20% increase. If you get that box stuffed with the proper amount of insulation, it could increase the apparent box volume by 20%. So that would put me just under 2.5 cubic foot, which is not that far away from the ideal. And what I mean by that is that by ideal, what most calculators and software are doing is you're dialing in a Q of the speaker, which is typically used for sealed speakers, but it can be used for vented as well. And you're kind of dialing in, do you want that bass response as flat as possible? Do you want it to kind of jump up on the bottom end? You know, where do you want that to be? To get a completely musically tonally flat response, usually that Q of that box is in the 0.7 range, give or take. Now, by going, you know, 0.5 or 0.4 or, you know, the other direction, it's not going to kill the sound. It's just going to make it sound different. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Yeah, so basically Parts Express is calling for 2.75 cubic foot vented enclosure for this and tuned to, I believe it's 35 hertz. So we're close. We're pretty close right now. I'm going to try to stuff it full. The other thing that I want to do is I want to isolate the woofer so that it's got no influence from the crossover or the mid-range or tweeter interfering with our frequency sweeps. So I'm going to completely bypass the crossover. We're just going to be running straight woofer and measuring it the way it is now without the insulation, and then measuring it again with the insulation, and let's see what happens. So my plan is I'm going to do one cabinet with the insulation, the other one I'll leave alone, that way I can measure them both. This insulation is super easy to use. If you've watched my previous videos, you kind of know where I get it. It's just a polyester fiber that is similar to polyfill, except it's in a sheet form. And this is actually used as insulation in Home Chef boxes. So the Home Chef Meal Company, I appreciate that you put this in your boxes to keep my food insulated, and it also doubles as great speaker insulation. And right now, with the economy, holy moly, even that like polyfill stuff is like $50 for a decent sized bag of it. So, you know, I've got tons of this stuff that I can use. So I'm pretty excited about it. But yeah, I can use this, just kind of fold it up and wad it up and throw it in there, not too tight, just so it's loose, but it's filling up the box. So I'm going to show you what I've got going on here inside right now. I hope you can see that fairly well. Just a big empty cabinet, and this is the leads to the crossover. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a jumper to go from here, positive negative, to the woofer positive negative. I'll just disconnect these so that that crossover network is not involved. And to give these things every fighting chance possible, I'm going to go ahead and use some nice thick wire. This is actually a 14 gauge pure copper. So I'm really digging these crimp-on terminals that I bought. They're pretty cheap. I got them from Amazon with this crimper for like 20 bucks. But I had never actually used these style before. I've seen them inside of speakers, pre-made, but I've never used them personally. And yeah, they're pretty cool. They're I think they're brass with like a electroplated, I don't know, copper or something on the outside, maybe gold. But basically the concept is fairly simple. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but I've slid this in so that the insulation of the wire is just on the outer portion, this bigger wing sticking off, and then the wire itself is going to get crimped on the inside there. And it works pretty good. You just make sure you strip it back not too far, and then you just slide it in, give it a crimp, and what you wind up with is a fairly decent looking connection. And then when I do these for my permanent assembly, I actually just put a little bit of solder on there too, just to make sure that they're not going anywhere. what I'll be doing with these is basically connecting them down here directly to the terminals. So I'm going to have the positive, which is on this side of the cabinet, negative on the other side of the cabinet. I'll go ahead and connect these guys. Now I'm ready to connect the woofer. As you can see, the crossover is completely bypassed. To try to keep those from kind of making racket in there, I'll probably just tie them up a little bit. I'm just using some Velcro here. Get one for each. All right, something like so. Make sure polarity is correct. Positives on this side, negative on that side. And I'll pick this up and kind of let you see what I have going on here. Okay. That's the basic premise. And like I say, I'm going to do one box with insulation and one without. So I've shown you how I'm going to put the woofer in. I'm going to go ahead and load up this cabinet with the insulation. The other one, I'm just going to put the jumper on. So what I'm going to do now is start peeling this plastic off of here, and just taking these sheets, which I'll show you up close what they are. So I had somebody comment that I was using a closed cell insulation. This is not closed cell, this is open cell. Open cell meaning you can breathe through it, right? It's loose enough to where you can breathe through it. It's not like a piece of hard board, compressed board. The fill is recycled PET staple fiber, and the film is 100% PET, made in the US of A. And just to make sure I've got enough of this in case it works, I'm going to go ahead and separate it now into pairs, or sets. So really, this is about all I got to do is get this plastic off of here. I think the way that I'll go ahead and start this is by doing the side panels and top and bottom panels, because I know for sure I'm going to have the insulation in the back and I'm going to have it on the walls. So for sure it's going to have a minimum of that amount of insulation. I'll show you what that looks like. So basically, using those two sheets, I was able to line both walls and get you down inside of here. At some point in the future, I'm going to go ahead and staple that on there, but for right now, it'll stay while I'm testing it. So that's that. Now let's go ahead and stuff it full, or as much as I can get in there. set for testing. In case some of you are wondering too, maybe you've seen me disconnecting and reconnecting this wiring coming from my receiver. This is just in-wall cable, but it's 12 gauge pure copper, so it's pretty decent cable. The connectors are banana plug crimp-on connectors from Parts Express, and I've also got them soldered, so it's crimped and soldered banana connectors. Those work really nice. All right, let's test some speakers, shall we? We'll try to get them kind of near the center here so we can get a fair comparison. Nothing but woofers here. Minus 10 where I normally test them at. We'll let them get warmed up. Microphone set up smack dab even with that woofer, and it is 36 inches from the center of that cone. So playing over digital from the NAD DVD CD player to the NAD T757V2 receiver via an HDMI ARC, and that's what I'll be running this sweep off of, so it should be fairly accurate. So this 50 hertz tone is going to establish our reference line. And this is from the left front speaker. So we just picked up minus 50. Get you in a little bit closer so you can see what that sounds like. This is our bass sweep. A 50 hertz test tone is here, setting our reference line, and you can see that we're down by minus 10 dB by the time we hit, about 40 something. So at 40 we're down by roughly 12 dB. So this part I'm not super thrilled about. I'd love to have that much higher than that. as far as the rest of the range goes, the crossover that is in this speaker is actually, it's either going to cut off at roughly, I think, 650, 675 on the low end, or possibly 800. Depends on which of the two versions of this crossover I have. Right now it's bypassed, the crossover is bypassed, so all we're seeing is what that woofer is capable of. Now, that being said, we're running this bass sweep, it looks like to 1,000 is what it runs to. And so that's a pretty good representation of what that woofer is capable of. Looks like if we follow this reference line from 50 dB, where we plus minus, roughly 10 to 12 dB, probably on that, on being conservative. All right, let's see what that speaker does. All right, let's see what happens with our bass sweep. See if it's a similar profile or different. Right front. Okay, so that's the right speaker without all that insulation in there. So I don't think there's a huge dramatic difference there. Except down here, it actually looks like it has a little bit more bass extension to 40. It's actually the same. So we are getting a little bit more bass extension without as much insulation, which is kind of the opposite of what you'd expect. Let me try to pull up these screenshots and we can look at them side by side. With insulation. So in this area right here, with the insulation, it's doing just the opposite of what you'd expect. Instead of smoothing that roll off, it's actually making it drop sharper. You see that? So here's our 50 hertz reference line. This is 40 hertz right here. See down here, 40 hertz. So at 40 hertz and 50 hertz, we are at the same sound pressure level without the insulation. With the insulation, here we are at 50 hertz, and then it takes a really sharp dive, and it's down by 12 dB by 40 hertz. So with the insulation, we are losing bass. Now let's look at this other area here. Let's look at this range from 50 to 100. So right now, with insulation, looks like we are about plus 6 dB at, what is that? Roughly 80 hertz. So plus 6 dB at 80 hertz, and then back down to reference level by 100. Let's see what the other one looks like. And without insulation. Okay, so again, here's our 50 hertz to 100 hertz range, and we're still at our reference line at 100 hertz, and we are still up by 6 dB at 80 hertz. Is this as smooth? This one here without the insulation, I think it's got a little bit sharper ramp. It ramps up here, I think, a little bit differently. Yeah, this one is kind of much steeper. It goes from 50 and then jumps up like 4 dB at 60 hertz. Yeah, so with the insulation, it is a little bit more gradual. You know, even though I'm putting insulation in it regardless, so I was keeping the two sets of insulation separate, one for that speaker and one for this speaker. I'll go ahead and use all the insulation I would use in that cabinet, and I'll just go ahead and add it to the other one, and let's see if we change that response at all. All right, so our last test was at minus 12 dB. And just to double check that, I can run a sweep on the right speaker because that one hasn't changed. But I want to make sure that it's the same sound pressure level with all that insulation in there. We're still set up pointing at that right speaker, which has got no insulation. So let's go ahead and set our reference level. Hertz tone. I'm trying to get to that minus 60. Right front. Okay. Good enough. So we know for sure that that right front is in this volume on the receiver set correctly. So let's try the left front now. And I'm going to have to swing this mic around again. Let's check our reference level of this left speaker with all the insulation. So we're actually down a little bit, just 1 dB basically. That's not a whole lot. Let's see what it did to the curve. So you can see that with the insulation, with all that insulation in there, we're now rolling off even sooner. And we're down by negative 16 dB, 40 hertz. So in this particular instance, and I'm not saying it would happen in every instance, but with this woofer in this cabinet, adding all of that insulation did not help. It didn't bring the bass response, it didn't stretch it further down. However, on the upside, it doesn't look like it really, I'm not sure if it killed any of this or not. We can compare it and see. We can see at 100, we're still essentially at our reference line. I mean, it's very similar with the exception of we're not making it to 40 hertz anymore, or 50 hertz, or 40 hertz for that matter, like in that cabinet. Just for kicks, I'll go ahead and run that one next, just so you can see the difference side by side. So I think what I would encourage you to watch is this area right in here when I run that right speaker, because that one doesn't have any insulation in it. All right, so we are losing low-end bass response with the insulation, 100% for sure. Are we losing any sound pressure level? We're definitely not losing sound pressure level. Let's look at this up to 200 range, because this is the flattest area in here. From 40 to 200 is really quite flat, plus minus, well, we're talking about a total of 6 dB, so it's plus minus 3 dB on the bottom end without insulation. And then packed full, I think we might be, well, to 200, no, we take a pretty good dip here before we ever get to 200. This in here looks slightly smoother. This possibly smoother, but then it cuts off there. Now, as far as the rest of it is concerned, from 200 up, does it clean that up at all? From 200 to 400, we've got kind of this big dip here, comes back up. Let's see what the other one does. So we've got pretty much the same profile, with the exception of that without the insulation, we're carrying that bass further over instead of it already rolling off. So based on this little experiment and disclaimer, using sheets of polystyrene might not be as effective as loosely packed polyfill. Okay, I'm gonna throw that out there. That's a possibility. Looser fill of the polyfill, maybe it reacts differently than the sheets do. But for my purposes, in trying to get the base established first before anything to build a foundation, now at least I know 100% positively that I'm sure I can line the cabinets with the insulation without really a fear of it changing the bass response or profile a whole lot. And in my opinion, that may be beneficial just to cut down on any kind of funky, echoing or resonance that might be coming from the inside of the cabinet through the port in the form of standing bass waves or emanating through the cone, possible. So yeah, at least I know I can put the insulation in there. It's not going to hurt it. It's only going to maybe help in the inside of the cabinet cut down on standing bass waves. As far as whether it's advantageous to try to make a small box larger by packing it full of insulation, I don't think, at least not in this case, it doesn't work. So other people maybe have had it work. In my case, not so much. The next thing that we can do though, and I'm going to go ahead and stop this topic in this video, and I'll go ahead and it'll be the same day. I'm just rolling right into another video, kind of another segment. And this one will be on, will it make a difference between a woofer that's TS parameters match your cabinet versus a woofer that is technically should have a larger cabinet. So that'll be a really interesting one. Like, is it really worth the extra money, spending, say, twice as much or more, 2 times plus more, to get a woofer that is, according to its TS parameters, more well suited for that size cabinet? So that one will be really cool. I'll show you that one next.